Before we can install the starter, we must first inspect the flywheel or the flex plate. We want to inspect the tooth on the ring gear for the flywheel, making sure all the teeth are identical and no missing tooth. We will rotate the flywheel or flex plate by turning the center bolt on the crankshaft harmonic balancer, which is located on the front of the engine. You will need a partner to do so, because all the tooth on the flex plate must be in place and correctly in place to engage the starter Bendix pinion gear. Failure to any of the flex plate teeth will cause a problem with starting the engine and engaging the Bendix starter pinion gear. That is one full rotation of the flywheel, and we can notice all the tooth are identical. And as we can also notice, the oil from the engine is dripping off of the flywheel. This is a sign that the crankshaft rear main seal is leaking. This leaking oil will dump itself into the transmission housing and eventually whip itself around with the flywheel and enter the starter. This oil will saturate the starter brushes, contributing to a increased wear and tear situation. So we must now proceed and install the engine starter and then repair the crankshaft rear main oil seal. Let's now take a look at installing the starter, and the only way to pass it up is to pass this wire up first. Then we will hold the starter at this angle, making sure that we do not damage the solenoid wire. So we want to make sure that the starter is seated perfectly to the transmission case. It will sometimes hang onto the axle, but that's okay. Once we're ready to install the bolt, we will hold this side of the starter with our hand and turn and twist it to make sure we can align the bolt with the starter. The starter anchoring bolt will be replaced the same way they were removed, with the same tool. We must also check the connection at the starter solenoid. And as we can see, we have our connection made, but we have changed the position of the starter solenoid during installation. Here again is another incorrect way to install the starter solenoid. We can see that this heavy positive cable extends too much next to the frame rail. So in the event of a broken motor mount, when the engine is to lift up, this positive terminal will touch the frame rail and most likely cause a fire. As we can see, the two bolts should be on the opposite side, and this terminal should be on the bottom of the solenoid. So we will have to relocate the solenoid. So this solenoid wire is on the bottom and the two terminals is on the opposite side. We cannot leave this connection like this because these two terminals are too close together and could most likely short-circuited. Also, if the motor mount is to become broken, when the engine should tilt to the right side of the engine bay, it will most likely come in contact with the frame and the solenoid wire. This is the correct position for the solenoid and the starter. We will notice that the positive terminal is on the outside, but it does not so much close to the frame rail. And the inside is the motor terminal. We must also feel up in here and make sure that the solenoid wire is not pressed against the positive battery cable. We will cover the bolt. If the positive battery cable is to come in contact with the solenoid wire, when the vehicle is start, the starter will remain hung up onto the flywheel. You will immediately have to disconnect the battery terminal. You will immediately have to disconnect the positive terminal from the battery to free the starter from the flywheel in the event it should get hung up on the flywheel during startup. Let's now go and try out the starter by cycling the key a couple times to start the engine. The starter solenoid can now be reattached and plugged together. It is very important that that solenoid wire is kept away from the exhaust manifold and reposition itself between the engine mount, bracket, and the engine block. Once we are finished installing the solenoid harness and attach its plug to the main harness with the zip tie, we will then reattach our splash guard. This splash guard is very important because it prevents water from splashing up inside the engine bay and getting in contact with the exhaust manifold. This procedure is easier done with the wheel removed.